if the live version doesn't work right. So, hello, this is something a little bit different. It's funny, I get nervous before I start these, but of course, once I do begin it gets pretty straightforward. So, this is both simultaneously the most I've ever prepared for an episode, and also the least I've ever prepared for an episode, and I'll explain a little bit. But this episode is about Scintilla, the book that I wrote. I've been talking a little bit, foreshadowing in previous episodes about it, and although it's not technically finished, it's up online for Amazon, but I realized that it needs some edits. So I'm going to do some corrections and then do a relaunch. But actually, I realized that that's the perfect time now is to talk about it instead of waiting for the finished product. I'm still very much wrapped in the process of it. And I wanted to talk about that because there's a lot of people out there that have a book inside them, or they want to be writers. And I want to talk about that process kind of while I'm embroiled with trying to go through that process. So I always try to encourage people that if there's something in your heart, you want to get it out. And, but, there's a caveat to that too. If you're planning to sell something, of course, you still need an audience, or you need to buy an audience through marketing, or you can do what's called a joint venture launch. And I didn't do any of those three things in this instance. And I made some other mistakes too that I'll talk about during this podcast as well. This is a solo podcast. Nobody's joining me for this one. So I was hoping to get it online live so that you could see this and possibly we could interact with some questions, but I'll just charge ahead because I can't see that it's uploading. So the next thing too that I looked at, and I'll talk about what the book is about and why I wrote it and all that. But just to talk about two extremes on the spectrum when you're creating something, doesn't matter what it is. But on one side, you have what I call MVP, or minimally viable product. In other words, the most minimal version of what you have in your mind that you're willing to put out there. And then obviously on the other side of that spectrum is the state of absolute perfection, which is unreachable. But again, that just gives you an idea of the two different parts. So you've got minimally viable product, just get it up, get it out there, and then perfection on the other end. And from the very beginning of this, I decided that I was going to lean for once a little bit to the minimally viable product. Just get the book out there, and I knew that it's pretty easy to create new editions of things and revise, especially when the information is electronic. So I wasn't that concerned about that. I just wanted to do my best and try to get it up there. I didn't want to mull over. Oh, yeah. I just started hearing myself. So let me turn that off. I can hear the I can hear the beginning of the podcast start all over again. Okay, so it is going live on YouTube, live with it sounded like about a 3 minute delay. So anyway, we've got that minimally viable product all the way to the side of perfection, but I just wanted to get it up and get it out there. Um, and I'll talk too about the involvement of Upwork. I've talked about it on the podcast before. I've used people on Upwork to help me, contractors, to do a variety of things. The video editor I met on Upwork. I did have a virtual assistant for a while, assisting with the podcast, getting the guest. I hired them on Upwork. And so there was some contractors involved in the book. I'll talk about that. But I want to get into, now that we've talked about MVP versus perfection, if you are interested in writing, one of the typical things that I felt like I had a strong understanding of before I went into it. Full disclosure, I was involved in a non-fiction meetup group back in the old days when Meetup was very popular. So I would discuss with other writers, and although I didn't have a big idea at the time, I've been writing on and off for a very long time. Never ever had written anything above, I think, 1,000 words before Scintilla, before this work. So definitely wasn't a long format writer. I wasn't a blog writer or anything like that. I would just write down ideas, and I enjoyed being around other creatives. So I ran a meetup for a little bit, for a while there, many, many years ago. So with that being said, I knew from a long time ago that if I ever was going to publish anything, I was going to self-publish. So on those two ends of the spectrum, you have self-publishing where you handle everything yourself, and then traditional publishing where maybe you have an agent or you get, you send your manuscript around and a publishing company picks up your book. They do the promotion, they do everything. So that's very appealing to people. But that business has radically changed. It was radically different 15 years ago, and it's even more different now. Big publishing houses, several of them in the last few years have gone out of business. I can't think of there was a really big name one that went out just a couple months ago that actually shocked the industry. But with all of the electronic tools now, anybody can publish a book. It's pretty straightforward. So I would say if you're thinking about publishing a book, seriously consider self-publishing. Joanna Penn has written some fantastic books about how to do that. I've never ever had any desire to go through an original old school style publishing deal. One, I don't think that my writing skill is up to par to even go to a big publishing house, just being honest. And then the other thing is, I don't know a single published writer that I've met personally or that I've talked to online or I've watched them online say that they felt like they got a good deal from the publishing company. So it seemed pretty clear to me that this was going to be a self-publishing project, but I was going to need some help along the way. So why did I write the book? That was probably, I think, to me, the most interesting part. So I was working on a business concept. The easiest way to say it very, very briefly, is it was a very miniature version of Amazon. It was an experiment, and me and another person had been going through this idea and developing it. And we thought we were going to start with 20 products. It was going to be an online store. Again, just think Amazon, but with 20 products, and the products were going to be promoted by influencers or people affiliate marketing and things like that. So we wanted to start with this very small version, and then we had all of these other different plans. So when we started to go through that process, we had contacted some influencers and we were discussing different strategies. But the thing that surprised us, something that myself in particular, took for granted, is that there wasn't enough profit in the products that we were able to locate that we thought would sell well. So obviously, there had to be enough money in selling these products to pay for us, our efforts, and there had to be enough money to pay to have it fulfilled. In other words, have someone box it up, ship it out, pay for that staff, and then of course pay the affiliate marketers and the influencers for selling. So in other words, a sales staff in a way. And we went further down the rabbit hole and said, well, what if we buy bigger quantities? And it got to a point where we realized we would have to buy shipping containers full of one product just to get a low enough price to make a profit. So it was a massive financial investment that we just weren't comfortable with on what we considered to be a relatively experimental idea, and it had just gravitated beyond a thought experiment, really. And we then took it one step further and said, okay, what if we create our own products from scratch? And we started looking around, trying to figure out what we could potentially sell. We looked at products and services and different things. And that took a lot more energy because we're trying to figure out how do you come up with something from scratch. I mean, I've thought of little ideas before and an app idea, but hadn't taken it seriously. So I do what I normally do in situations is I'll get a bunch of information about something. I call it clustering information. So if I have to go into something, like before I launched the Free Time Mastermind podcast, I learned about podcasting. My typical thing is I'll read 3 to 5 books on a subject and then start to move forward from there. Same thing with the mastermind group. I read about running mastermind groups. I was in a mastermind group. So I kind of go to school on a subject, and then at some point I just decide, okay, I have enough knowledge to at least get started. And that's what I did in this case. I started to look around for information of how do you come up with a business idea from scratch. And surprisingly, there was no book on it. There were books on creativity and how to explore your mind and become more creative, but not one specifically about how to come up with a business idea from scratch. Most business books out there in the nonfiction realm are specifically addressed to once you have the idea. That's where all the books start. Just tons and thousands and thousands of books once you have your idea. How to market it, how to build it, how to outsource it, all of that's out there. So there's tons of competition for that book. And when I realized that that informational product, that book didn't exist, that became the idea. So entrepreneurs are, the easiest way to say it is they're problem solvers. So especially if an entrepreneur finds something that doesn't exist that should, and they think there's an adequate number of people that would be interested in buying it, well, that's something to take a look at. So the product became the book. Now that's not 20 products, that's one. But I thought, wow, that's something that could take 6 months to develop, and it might be interesting from an intellectual perspective. And I started taking notes and pulling out old notes about different things and trying to come up with a sketch basically of what the book would look like, because I wanted to test to see if I had enough material to even write a book, or was this going to be a pamphlet? Was it? So I started thinking about size, and I started doing more research and into thought processes. And how can I break this book up into chapters and make it interesting? But I did want it to be a very nuts and bolts book, because there are plenty of great books about artistic creativity and how to get yourself in that state. And I talk a little bit about that in the book. And believe it or not, this podcast is not so much about the content of what's in the book. This is more about how it began, how I got there in the process, because there's more than enough to fill an episode about what I went through just to get the book. And I want to influence the people out there that are interested in writing, um, to kind of spare you from some of the things that I went through. And thankfully, I didn't make any huge mistakes, but there were things I learned from. And we'll get into those in just a moment. So that was why I wrote it, because I had a problem I was trying to solve. And the books that I normally would go to solve that problem didn't exist. So I thought, okay, well, there needs to be a book about this subject. So that began that. And then now, what is the book about? Of course, it's about how can you go from a completely blank slate, blank piece of paper, and come up with a business idea. The book doesn't get as deep into testing the validity of the idea, because again, there's plenty of books out there about that. That might be a second volume, but this is about how to get started from scratch, because the target audience of this were maybe people who were in a job that wasn't very satisfying and they want to break away from it. Or I have a friend that wants to be a digital nomad. They want to travel and they need a business that they can work remotely. Well, they can come up with an idea that allows them to do that. So that was my audience. And so it was to start from a blank page and go from there and build. And there's two main sections of the book. One is the more creative side, where you can do these creative exercises and thought exercises to bring things forward, observation, conversation. It's a section called OCIC. And then there's a second, deeper part that's more research, where you can research your way into finding a business idea. And I'll give you just a quick example. I recently purchased this. This is it's a Samsung 1 terabyte SSD drive, so it has no moving parts in it, and it's a backup drive basically is what I'm going to use it for. And it comes with a USB A to USB A. It also came with a USB A to USB C. So the easiest way to think about ideas, obviously this began as an idea for Samsung SSD drives. That's not particularly new, but the easiest way to come up with a new business is to look at something that's already existing and then try to build something from that. So one thing that I dislike about this, and again, entrepreneurs, they either give pleasure or take away pain. You want to make a lot of money doing a product, it needs to give pleasure or take away pain. So in this instance, the thing that frustrates me about this is it takes up a lot of desk space. It's small, but you have to hook it in and then you toss it up on the desk. So and there's a lot of stuff on Etsy uh, like this. You could get a 3D printer and come up with a stand where this just sets up on the desk. and takes up very little space. Whereas just flopping it around and with the full extension of the cable, it's a mess, and it's not it's kind of unsightly as well. So I'd rather just be able to plop this thing into a stand instead of it having like so that could be something that you could 3D print for less than $2 or $3 and potentially build a business. We on the podcast we had interviewed that gentleman before from Etsy who makes $1 million a year. So Etsy's no joke. I mean, you can make a serious amount of money. As a matter of fact, the webcam that I'm using right now is a Logitech, and the device that it's hooked onto around the monitor I bought on Etsy. It's something this guy custom fabricated, and I bought it, and it replaced a previous one I had that I also bought on Etsy. They both have things I like about them, so sometimes I'll switch them around. So it's a serious thing. Now that's a real basic idea. You start off with something that frustrates you, and then figure out, okay, how can I solve that? What logistically do I need to do to get that created? So about two-thirds into the book for authors out there, they're like, what's the page count? What's the word count? It's a little bit over 20,000 words. And I've got some visuals here that to show you in a bit to show you the size of the book and the format that I went with. But about two-thirds through the writing, I was having trouble connecting chapters together. There were certain concepts that I wanted to put into one chapter, and I had trouble getting those together with each other. So I was doing pretty well with coming up with individual ideas and getting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 paragraphs out of my mind on certain things. And some of it I was using things that I had read. Some of it I was tapping with businesses that I had worked with before and businesses that even I had created. So I started to reverse engineer. How did I come up with that idea? Or how did this person that I partnered with, how did they come up with that original idea? And we even talk about that quite frequently on the podcast. You notice I ask a lot of the people that come in, what made you think of the idea? What was that spark? And of course, that's the title of the book is scintilla, which is Latin for spark. It's the tiniest part of the spark. And how do you how do you strike something together to get the spark? So that was the point of the whole book. And the subtitle is The Ultimate Guide to Generating Business Ideas, Products, and Services. A little clunky. We tested a couple subtitles, and that was what we came up with. Nowadays, even more so than ever in the nonfiction market, the subtitle is almost as or sometimes more important than the title. But like I said, about two-thirds of the way through, I got a professional editor. It was the most that I had spent on the book. It was about $700, which is very cheap. But again, we're talking about a small book. And I hired a gentleman that had 40 years in the publishing and editing business. He was very well versed. And you'll understand in a minute why I won't mention his name because I want to be able to speak freely about this experience. And they clearly knew what they were doing. We did a 30-minute face to face. I hired them on Upwork. They said all the right things, definitely experienced. And something that we all know that nobody's going to care for your project like you care for it. So even if someone has the skill set and the background, they're still not going to look at it with the same level of seriousness and sincerity that you do. And I'm pretty good about communicating expectations. It's a big part of my business dealings. I make sure that even if something has to be over explained, we get all the details out. And I thought we had written expectations, deliver this by when, and it didn't quite come together like that. It took longer than expected, which is okay. I always try to factor that in. But a lot of the things we agreed to that he was going to do, and me being a first-time author, there was so much I didn't know. So when I got back what he had done, I realized that 50% of the things that we agreed that he was going to do, he didn't do. So I went back and was trying to get him to fulfill that commitment and get these other things done. And he would do a few things and then I'd have another conversation. And then at a certain point, I realized it was taking too much of my time. So I just closed the contract. I did pay it in full. And I had to now take what they had done and try to complete it. And the biggest thing that I was hoping that they would do is to put the kind of the chapters in order, some of the arranging. So it wasn't just a matter of editing; they were also going to do some formatting. So it was a lot of work. Again, for a small book and for $700, I still don't feel like I got my money's worth. But what I did get is I got a $700 education on. I should have just learned how to do it myself, which that's okay as long as you're being educated on something and you're learning a lesson, the money doesn't matter. As long as you learn something, the worst thing that can happen, and I had a situation happen not too long ago where there was some money involved, and I haven't yet figured out what I learned from that because that project also didn't work out at all, and I haven't been able to really pull anything useful out of it. But in this case, I understood. I was very afraid, particularly of the formatting of the book, because when you upload a book online to sell, to have it printed by someone else, print on demand, which I did through Amazon. Um, the formatting needs to be correct, or your book doesn't look right. So I'll go into that too. Um, this was the first on Amazon when you upload your manuscript. You really need two things. You can have just a book, your book done in MS Word, which is what I had mine in. And again, it had been quote unquote professionally formatted. When I uploaded it to Amazon's KDP, or Kindle Digital Publishing, I believe that stands for, it didn't fit the format. In other words, it looked one way on my MS Word, and then when it was uploaded to Amazon, it looked completely different. And that was very painful because it probably took 2 weeks of playing around with the text, because you've got to realize if you make a change or do something in chapter one, it changes how many spaces there are through the rest of the book. So it was quite a lot. I'm sure some people that are experienced in this, they already have figured out how to get around that, but I didn't at the time. So that took quite a while. But here is let me get this there. There it is. This was the very first one I had done, and wow, it's because it's white. I'm using that virtual background. And they give you these proofs. You can order up to 5 of them. And so the spark scintilla there, it's a sparkler. And this was their matte coating, which I actually went with glossy, but this one is an early draft, so you might see some formatting errors and different things, and the writing is relatively big. So here's the thickness of the book, not very thick. It is 20,000 words. I want to compare it to, and I think that's 16-point type. It's pretty big, but again, I'm writing this as more of a guidebook and a workbook. So I wanted people to be able to get through it very quickly and start coming up with ideas. I didn't want it to be some dry academic tome that would take forever to get through. Now, alternatively, here's George Orwell's The 75th edition of 1984, and look how thick this thing is. This is monstrous. And I think this is it's 298 pages. I If my math is correct, I think this is 89,000 words. So for you aspiring nonfiction writers out there, most business books, um, you get into that good range at about 60,000 words. So my business book is a third the size of most popular business books that you've read. So again, this was a guidebook. It served a very specific purpose and didn't need to be large, because I wanted people to get in, get the information, create ideas, and move on. And I left out I could have filled it with, I could have put a lot of filler in there, but I chose not to. So this is the um, glossy version. And I know it's hard to appreciate on camera, but this turned out so much better. And again, the great thing about Amazon, once you upload your cover art and get that figured out, uh, you can have a few printed for the cost of, I think those were, I don't know what my printing cost was. It was less than $3 a piece. You could order five of them for $3 a piece plus shipping so that you could look at them. And that's exactly what I did. When I got that first copy back and looked at it, I immediately realized, okay, there are things about the book that needed to change. So I started not a rewrite, but a kind of a very deep edit after that. I also, after about the fourth pass of an edit, I had a hardcover version made with the glossy cover. A little bit, it's basically the same size as the paperback, but just with a nice thick hardcover. They did a great job. I know people give Amazon a lot of criticism, and some of it's well deserved, but the ease of which, for you writers out there, the ease of which, even with somebody like me that had never done this before, some of it was frustrating, yes. But if you have your book in MS Word, you've got the page numbers, you've got the chapters, you've got all of that in there. Very simple to to convert that into a book and get it up for sale online. If you go exclusively through Amazon, they give you the ISBN number if that matters to you. Um, if you and I, this video is not about KDP, but you can keep everything on inside the Amazon because most books are sold on Amazon. They're, let's face it, they're a monopoly. So I just chose to do everything inside of their ecosystem. So I did an ebook version, which is, what we would call a Kindle version or ebook. That's pretty interesting. That was formatted a completely different way, and I was able to do things custom. That's going to get revised. I did the paperback version, and then of course I did this hardcover version. And it was good to, even though I knew these weren't going to be the final product, it was good to have them in my hand to see them. Um, to check the size of the font and what's a couple of bucks to have this sent to you. So I would say, and they let you send five every time you make a change to the manuscript that you load. So you can buy as many of these as you want as you make changes. So hopefully this next time that I upload all of these, it'll be the final version until hopefully years from now when new information comes out and I can do a revised version. So back to the expectations about selling. Like I said, that if you're going to publish any artistic work, it could be a painting, it could be a poem, it could be a song, a book. You need an audience if you want to sell. So if you already have an audience, if you have a podcast and you've got 10,000 subscribers, that's a good start. Or if you are in a position at a company where, or you're a professional speaker and you go around the country and you're already known, that's a great time to go ahead and publish that book because you have an audience, you travel around. Or secondly, you have a very big budget. I'm talking about to be honest, tens of thousands of dollars to sell your book. And of course, there's not a lot of profit in books. Um, and I don't want to go too far into that. But and then the third thing is if you don't have the audience and you don't have the big budget, the next best thing to do is to do a joint venture launch. The best section I've seen written about it is in Jeff Walker's book Launch. I've probably recommended that book in 5 of the 18 episodes on the Free Time Mastermind podcast. The book is that good. It's probably the number 2 recommended book that I have right now. I would say the top 3 are Dan Martell's Buy Your Time Back, Jeff Walker's Launch, and several other titles. Fight for number 3, but um, Joe Polish's book, What's in It for Them, I think is what it's called, is number 3. Fantastic books. But Jeff Walker Launch, if you're an entrepreneur or you're starting to be, great book because he goes very deep into the joint venture launch. Joint venture is great if you have no audience. You're coming out of you're not known, you're nobody, let's face it. That's a great way to get over that hump. So in a joint venture launch, which in my position would be the best option, is I would do a book launch with somebody that already has, let's say, a large mailing list, or they have a big platform, or they have a big audience. Um, and I make a deal with them that they promote this to their group, and then I give them a massive amount of the percentage of the profits. So you get it out there, and you could say, "Hey, I sold, X number of books," but of course, you're not going to make very much money. Same thing is true if you spend tens of thousands of dollars on the marketing. It's just the difference is if you spend tens of thousands on marketing and sell no books, you're out tens of thousands of dollars. If you broker a joint venture deal correctly, you'll have little or zero out-of-pocket expenses. And if you don't sell any books, you'll just have somebody very disappointed with you, potentially. So the joint venture is the way to go for people starting out that don't have a big marketing budget. And I actually wouldn't suggest spending a lot of money on marketing. What a lot of people do is, and I've had a lot of authors recently on the podcast, they just go on podcasts and they're working their way up, to larger and larger audiences, and they hope to sell a few books. And if you sell 1,000 books on your own as a self-published author, that's something. I mean, that's pretty significant. I worked with musicians many, many years ago, and very few of them I worked with, and they worked hard, good music, traveled all over the place, opened up for big bands. A lot of them didn't sell more than 1,000 units. So there's just, there's just not a lot of money in the publishing, selling part of the book. So now we're in this age where information is commoditized. People expect their movies to be free. They expect their songs to be free. And now we're seeing where they want the information to be free. And in one of Alex Hormozzi's books, I think it was $100 million offers, he talked about give the information for free, charge for the implementation. So you'll see a lot of authors doing free book giveaways, or they'll give away a little bit of it in exchange for your email so that they can build an email list and get that audience and sell their products. So again, it's a chicken and an egg. So you have to have the audience. And there's many different ways to build that. But I went into this knowing I wasn't going to do any of those three. I had a bigger plan for other things later. This is just going to be one piece of something much larger. And I don't mean larger in the sense of grandiose. It's just it wasn't a high priority to try to move a lot of these units. That's not the end game here. It's a piece in a larger strategy. So I wanted to talk too about the collection of ideas. Most of the book, when I had ideas, I would write it down in Word. I also am a big fan, and this is what I've been looking at the whole time. This is made by a company called Tops, and it's just a legal pad. It's called Docket Gold. And no, there's not going to be any affiliate links, but I want to tell you about these. The Docket Gold legal pads are considered the best you can get. They're not that much more compared to probably what you have laying around. The pages are thicker. I use, see if I have one here. I don't. I'm a big fan of the Sharpie. Oh, there we go. I have one good one here. I also use the plastic ones, but I have one at each of my desks here, but I really like these. It's a fine point. Where this comes in with the papers, it's essentially a fine point permanent marker. And when you have those cheap legal pads, it bleeds through and it messes up the next page, and it's sometimes hard to see what you wrote. But that doesn't happen with this Topps Docket Gold. The paper's very thick. You just much more substantial. And you can get big stacks of them on Amazon. I recommend it. And get some reliable pens that don't mark up your hands. That's why I like the Sharpie fine points. So if it wasn't on the legal pad, sometimes, a lot of times, most of the book again was written straight to the Microsoft Word. Secondarily, the information would be on the legal pads when I was sketching out ideas. And then, of course, there were a lot of little 3x3 pads and various notepads laying around that I just would get a moment of inspiration and write things down. So a lot of times I could just write a handful of words and then go back later and research that concept. So I tend to write in shorthand, and then when I get to the keyboard, I'll flesh that out and maybe do some research related to it. I wanted to talk too about, I'd mentioned the editor came in, and again, they did help me. They did make some changes, and then I went back and changed some of their work as I started to understand the process a little bit better. So going back to one of the things I asked them to do was to try to make more sense going from chapter to chapter. Because, first of all, the struggle of trying to create something, to write something, to pull something from your mind, that's tough enough as it is. To make it cohesive from paragraph to paragraph, from chapter to chapter, and then have this overall theme, that's some really heavy lifting. And you don't think about that stuff when you get excited about writing a book. And so to pull ideas together, that's where I used AI. Whole entire books, I think, are probably written by AI these days. I will tell you, though, that the stuff that I've seen AI write that I've been able to produce, and I'll sometimes as an experiment, I would go in and say, hey, give me 500 words on this subject, and I would give it proper prompts. Sometimes I would tell it to write in a certain style. I gave it a lot of detail. Never, not once and I'm talking primarily about Chat GPT, and I do have the paid version. Not a single time has it written anything that I thought was that good. The information was there, but as far as compelling, persuasive, and I'm not saying I write much better, but Chat didn't. I can tell when something's written by AI, and I've seen other people, blog posts and things that I know are AI because they just lack. I don't know what it is. It lacks humanity, and it's almost like when drum machines came in the 1980s, they had to create a feature called quantize because human drummers don't play perfectly. So they had to put a button in there that you pressed to make it slightly imperfect. In other words, the automatic drum beat machine would play a little too fast or a little too slow. It wasn't extremely obvious, but it humanized it and made it feel so. Writing, I don't think AI is going to take over writing like they said that it would. I don't think, and they definitely can't tell compelling stories. The Some of the information that I got out of it was pretty good, but often I would have to just toss it out and just use the concept. But where AI did shine was in research. You have to be careful though, because AI is sometimes wrong. So if something was very critical about the year something came out, I would double check that with Google and other resources. So be careful with AI because it told me some things that were just on its face factually incorrect. I mean, completely and utterly factually incorrect, which shocked me. But there's a lot of reports with that. But where AI shines is putting those disparate paragraphs together. I would give it this. I wanted both of these ideas in the chapter, and I would give it the last paragraph of one idea, and then the next paragraph on the incoming idea. And I would say, can you write a paragraph in between them that ties these two concepts together? And of course, what it wrote was, in my humble opinion, unusable, but it gave me creatively the idea of, okay, I have an idea now how I can marry these two ideas together. And then same thing with chapter flow. Um, and I would say 20% of the time, AI suggestions were completely ridiculous. 10 to 15% of the time, there were a few words in a sentence that I could use. But again, I don't feel in this being July 2024, wasn't that impressed with AI as far as its ability to write large sections. I wouldn't trust it with very much. So I kept AI on the research side and a little bit to button some chapters together. So the other part, I wanted to just very briefly talk about the formatting. The formatting, the size of the book is 5.5 by 8.5. So theoretically, you should be able to go into MS Word and go to the top where you can choose format and just say 5.5 to 8.5. So let's say you write your main manuscript in regular 8.5 by 11 or whatever MS Word's natural format is. And then you just click the button to change the format. And then suddenly it squeezes all that information. Excuse me, it doesn't make the font smaller, but you know what I'm saying? It brings it down to those smaller pages. I think I'm about to lose my voice. to the 5.5 to 8.5, which was, somewhat typical for a business book size, but also too, it gave me, it made the book a little bit thicker, thick enough that if I wanted to, even though I didn't on either book, I could have the title written on the spine of the book. If I made it smaller, like a tiny paperback that we're used to, like the things we had to read for high school, I could get this much thicker, but then it would be harder to read. So the 5.5 to 8.5 is a real comfortable size to read. If you write trashy romance novels, this size might be too big, or it might be fine. Depends on how much you have there. So just know that the formatting in KDP is completely different from the paperback version. And I used the exact same manuscript for the paperback and the hardback version when I uploaded them to Amazon's KDP, and it still didn't line up. So even though these books are they're identical in every way, when I uploaded them to Amazon, for some reason, I still had to go in, and I think I spent 3 days redoing the paperback version and changing things to make it look correctly in the hardback version. So just know there's a little bit of a challenge there. Maybe sometime in the future I could find somebody that understands that better. But that was a part that was an unexpected struggle that I went through. And I already talked about ordering the proofs. Definitely get your hands on some copies, and it's nice. I know I did get a little bit of a giddy feeling opening that box, and there's your name and your face. And I try not to get too hung up in that, but that was pretty fun. Okay, so then what I have in here is to talk a little bit about what's in the book. I like to create my own acronyms, and I have a few concepts in here that I created myself just to help facilitate the understanding. I don't think these concepts are going to take over the world, but it did enhance the understanding of some of these concepts. So in one, I have the acronym OCIC, like Oscar, Charlie, Indigo, Charlie, and that stands for observation, conversation, investigation, and contemplation. So that works from the outside in. So obviously the O for observation is observing the world. And I give some examples in here about, well, we did that great example with the drive, right? That's observation. We're looking at an existing product and thinking, what can we sell along with that? What could we, and I even talk about um, a competitive product. So if you wanted to take that and make a whole new drive, which is obviously a very complex process, you would find the flaws in what's currently wrong with it, what people are complaining about, and then you produce a new one. But that's what most people do. And that's the tougher road. So in the book Scintilla, the idea was to look at things from a very unconventional, unorthodox standpoint. So I don't talk as much about how to create a competitive product because that's what everyone is doing. What I talk about is complementary products and companion products, and you don't hear that as much. And it's an easier path to get something to market. It's much easier to when you have something from scratch and you have to explain to people something that's never existed before, that's tough. But if you say, hey, those 1 terabyte drive from Samsung, we built a housing for it. That's very simple, easy to explain. The marketing gets a lot easier. So I talk a lot about using that as an opportunity. But as far as the OCIC, the observation is going through experiences. And there's a part in here about when I went to the gym and the friction that when we get frustrated trying to do business with a particular organization, when you go through that and you feel that frustration, you should take note of that because again, entrepreneurs, they take away pain or they give pleasure. And if you start experiencing pain during a transaction, take a note of that. What is it about it that's frustrating you? How could you make that not frustrating? What product or service could you sell to that company so that you're not having that awful experience? So I talk about that as well. And then the second part, the investigation and the contemplation, that's working towards the inside. Investigation could be patent search, which I talk a little bit about that, looking at things that are going to come out by big companies. And you can get ahead of the curve and start creating those complementary and companion products. Let's see if I can get into that part real quick. Yeah, and I also talk about that the scariest probably part of the book is where I suggest actually calling companies, particular particularly people of certain roles in certain companies, and just asking them what they need, which I mean it's simple and nobody does it. But I talk about, for instance, I'll give you a great source of inspiration where you could just call and find out what that company like. If you really should start off with an industry that you want to be in. The more specific, the better. If you just have no idea, there's still plenty of information in here that can help you. But let's say you got your heart set on creating an iPhone app, and that's your thing. You're just not sure. That's a good start. You've got some areas there where you could start looking at some patents, some trademarks, do some trend searches, which I talk about on here, and you could come up with something that would sell. Um, but also picking up the phone, which nobody does anymore. And there's fantastic opportunity on the other end of that phone. You could call product development teams, product managers. Yes, there's gatekeepers. I talk about that, how to get through those people. And you just be honest and earnest and say, look, I'm a young entrepreneur. I'm an old entrepreneur, and I have experience in this, that, and the other. Sell yourself a little bit. And I just want to talk to somebody about and the more you know about what you're calling about, that helps a little bit. But you could just have a wide open question and say, what product or service do you all need to help you with your process? And you'd be surprised. People love to complain, and you like complaints. You want to hear that because the complaints are the opportunity. So even because I work in basically customer facing customer service, and I have very unpleasant conversations with people, unfortunately, because I have to, because of the role of what I do, I have to deliver some pretty tough news. And sometimes it turns out, and I try to make that interaction as pleasant for the other person as possible. But for a great many people, it's an unfortunate situation. So I'm calling and having to deliver bad news all day. So in that though, there's opportunity to have a special interaction and turn that around and make it as positive as possible. But because I'm customer facing, I know what the customers are complaining about. So if we've all had this where we work for a company and they make a change that makes no sense to anybody on the floor that handles the customer, because you can clearly see that decision didn't have the customer in mind. They might have thought it did, but in reality, it doesn't. And of course, nobody that talks to the customer ever gets consulted. So those people are dying to tell you. And they're very accessible. You can get on LinkedIn and find people in particular industries that are customer facing that would be happy to talk about what frustrates them, what frustrates the customer. And then you can design an entire company around servicing that, or it could just be a one-off service or product. I even talk about selling the idea itself. You don't have to develop a whole iPhone app. You can just have a really good fleshed out idea and just sell the idea, sell the intellectual property. You don't have to build an empire. You can sometimes just make really good residuals off the right deal. So I talk about people that you can call just to get straight into it. I was looking for, yeah, there it is. This is a section later in the book that I'm particularly proud of, where I talk about the difference between competitive products, companion products, and complementary products. I'll just read this part. Companion products are items that enhance the use of another product. They are recommended for use in conjunction with the primary products. Example would be phone cases for smartphones. So that's companion. Um, they don't require each other to function, but it's basically the 1 terabyte drive idea I was talking about, where I would pay somebody to build me a base station for it so that it sits on the desk better without taking up so much space. So that's a companion product. And then you have complementary products. Complementary products are used together and enhance each other's value. Their demand is linked such that an increase in the use of one product typically boosts the demand of another. A great example would be printers and ink cartridges. There, there's a dependency level there. Your remote control and batteries. I try to get as many, like the wireless remote mice that I use. I try to get those rechargeable now because I got tired of changing the batteries. So somebody had that idea, right? They went, well, let's take the batteries out of this and put in permanent rechargeable that you can't access, and then you just have to throw the mouse away after 2 years. And I prefer that instead of swapping out batteries all the time. When the battery gets low, the indicator light comes on, and I charge it up. And so in the book, we go through all of that. Like I said, I'll go through later a little bit deeper in another episode about the material inside the book, but this was more about the process. So one thing that I see from talking to people on the podcast, these entrepreneurs, and because I had to do a lot of, I wouldn't say soul searching, but I had to do a lot of self analysis when I wrote Scintilla because I had to think about past businesses, things that I had been involved with before, what worked, what didn't. So I had to do an autopsy on a few businesses that didn't do so well and some that did, and why did the ones that work and not. So what's interesting is a lot of times you'll find that what somebody starts off to do, you end up doing something completely different. The classic example is, what did you go to college for? If you went to college, I don't think college has as much validity as it used to, but a lot of people will go for one thing and they never work in that field. So that's the most common example. But from an entrepreneurship standpoint, you have people that begin with one idea in mind, and that product or service on the other side ends up completely different. And just very quick examples. We were trying to do a mini Amazon, and what came out of it? A book completely. And I wasn't really excited about writing the book. I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I was an early adopter of audiobooks. I was a member of Audible, I think in 1998, way before they became acquired by Amazon. So when I came up with the idea for Scintilla, I mainly just wanted to do the audiobook, which I haven't yet. I've done the KDP softback and the hardback, but I haven't recorded the audiobook because I wanted to make sure that the text had been at a level where I was happy with, which it's there now. I just have to upload the other versions and then I'll start doing the voiceover narration. I'm also going to do that myself in-house. I've been studying how to do that, got some books, clustered that information, read how to do voiceovers, joined some Facebook groups about uh, voice talent and audiobook narrator groups and things. So I'm gathering all of that information so that I can produce a respectable audiobook. So I'm most excited about that, but it didn't start that way at all. It was going to be an online retail store. And years ago, I was trying to be a musician. I wanted to be a musician. And I just realized one, my talent is don't have very much of it. And two, I wasn't going to commit to the practice. And I had to be honest with myself about that. But I liked musicians. I liked being around music, being around the creative process. So I actually bought some equipment and started running live sound. In other words, I would uh, rent myself and my equipment out to bands. I would show up before the gig got started, put the floor monitors out, and it wasn't fancy because I was dealing with smaller venues and smaller bands, but I enjoyed that for a while. But your equipment gets really beat up, and after having to constantly replacing cables and microphones because people aren't going to treat your stuff as well as their own. So I decided to actually go from there to a recording studio. And I owned a project studio for a while and have my name on a few CDs out there. Nothing I'm exceptionally proud of. I'm proud of the musicians that I got to work with, but I was still in a learning curve um, when all of that information came out. But that's not how it started. It started with me and a guitar, and I thought, yeah, it'd be great to be on stage and that never happened, and I'm okay with that. I had a great run, and the studio was still to this day one of the most fun things that I got to do, to hang out with those musicians and record something, and also ended up having a very similar experience in the art world. I was doing painting kind of as a therapy, as a therapeutic exercise. And like most things, I sat there and thought, well, maybe I could do something with this. And I actually had a show of my art. Was doing some photography. I was doing painting. I was working in different mediums and painting on canvases and doing some creative photography, and did a show and sold some work. And I thought, wow, this might be something. And then I started hanging around with some really talented visual artists. And I had the experience of the musicians all over again. I thought, wow, these people have a lot of talent. And I'm not going to put in that much time to be as good of a painter as some of the people that I worked with. So I ended up opening an art gallery. So I still got to work within the industry. I still got to work with some fantastic creative people, and but I didn't have to worry about the fact that my painting sucked. So that was what I did, and that was a really fun experience too. So the point there is where the journey begins and where you end up from a business perspective. Just get started, start moving in a direction. You're probably going to end up somewhere completely different. It's okay if you want to commit to something and just this is the thing and I'm going to do the thing, but always be open when those little side doors pop open, not distractions, but the thing sometimes always doesn't always end up being the thing. So just be open to that flexibility. And I always was. And I tried to be realistic about what I was going through. I don't think Stephen King's ever going to get nervous about my writing ability. I think I'm proud of what I produced. I think there's some material in there that's definitely helpful. I think if you do go to that book with a completely blank page and have no idea, and you do 20% of what I ask you to do in the book, you're going to come out with an idea. If you do 100% of the book, you'll probably come out with a pretty strong idea. And I wanted to talk too about just this last, and we'll wrap this up, the having an audience and the spending the marketing or doing the joint venture. The commonality of those three things between having 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, or you're going to spend $10,000 on marketing, or on the other side you're going to give all of your commission for your books to somebody else who has 10,000 subscribers. And this didn't really hit me until today, that all three of those things have to do with trust. So you've either organically grown your subscribers and you've grown an audience of people who trust you. And then you can hold up this product and say, here's this thing. I know you trust me. I know you enjoy my content on YouTube or however you've built that audience. And then you put that product or service in front of them. So you've built that trust. And then the second one is marketing. Marketing builds trust. That seems strange, but if you look at the numbers, sometimes people have to see the same product. I forget what the number is. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's larger than most people realize. You might need to see the same advertisement 6 or 7 times. I know the ads are frustrating online and they frustrate me too, but through that repetition breeds trust, because you see that message over and over again, and you ignore it, you ignore it, you ignore it, and then one day, you know what, I'm going to check that out, and you click on it, because through that ad spend, they've broken through and they've got the trust barrier, or at least enough for you to check it out. And then the third one with the joint venture, you're borrowing someone else's trust, but to write a book and just throw it up on Amazon and think something's going to happen. I knew nothing was going to happen. I know nothing is going to happen. The small group of friends and family have been very supportive, and I know I'm going to move some units that way, and I'm very grateful for that. But to be a big selling published author and to do it full time, you'd have to already have a massive audience or have a massive marketing budget. And I just want people to be realistic about that. That doesn't mean don't write the book, because when you're writing that book, you might get halfway through it and meet somebody that takes you down a completely different road, and the book never gets published, but you end up doing something fantastic. But you've got to get the ball rolling and get momentum going before anything is going to happen. And I'm speaking, in a way to my younger self, because I loved the academic, I loved the theoretical, I loved reading and consuming constantly information, but I wasn't producing very much. Every now and then I would go way out on a limb and do something crazy, recording studio, art gallery, and I've had fun, and I've done some very fun, crazy stuff, and have very fond memories about that. But in between are these really long periods of kind of dry academic consumption of information, whereas I would have done much better had I just kept pushing forward, reading the books, of course, but you don't want to get kind of soaked down into that analysis paralysis. You want to consume information, but at some point you need to be actionable. And that's the message here. So whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's a blog or YouTube channel or writing a book, definitely are you going to make a bunch of money? Probably not. There's very little room at the top, but do it anyway because it's going to take you down the road and you're going to have some amazing things. And I don't want to be that guy that says, buy my book, buy my book. If you're looking for a business idea, don't buy it right now. Actually, I'm going to say don't buy my book because it is available on Amazon, but this radically updated version, or I'd say 20% of it, it just looks different and a lot is added to the end. So don't buy it right now. I'll do a later podcast where it's an official launch. It'll be when I start talking about the audio book being done, that's when the other three will be done. So I'll have all four formats. That will be KDP's Kindle, the paperback, the hardback, and the audiobook. So that's in four formats. And that's a thing too. So even for you, if it doesn't sell, if you write that book, you're still a published author. You can still check that box. Recording studio, yes. Art gallery, yes. Curator, if that's what you're interested in doing. For me, I'm about learning things and getting a very wide, varied experience of life, and I've had that. And now in this book, I get to try to impart some of that wisdom and try to get the next generation, or maybe even some people from my generation, out of the chair, move forward, and get a project going once you've got the right idea.